So often you see the videos and TV features where white-tailed deer are feeding or walking. But hunters spend precious little time comparatively watching deer. They spend most of their time watching where they expect deer to be or where deer have been. It's called scouting. And there's no better teacher than MSU Wildlife Extension Specialist Glen Dudderer. He knows his deer and his deer sign. We're going to go scouting with Glen in just a moment, so you stay tuned. I'm Fred Trost. It's Thursday night, time for Michigan Outdoors. What signs should hunters begin looking for to find deer? Well, the most obvious is their tracks.
Old tracks, quite old.
Yeah, very old.
Must have been muddy because they're sunk down into the sand quite a bit.
And they've lost all definition. I mean, but it rained last night.
Oh, look right here.
Yeah, this is
right here.
This has been made sometime between 8 and 9 o'clock last night and now. So this track and this, that's a nice big track there. You notice it's well defined. The rain
over here,
hasn't blurred.
we have even some better ones.
Yeah, some really good ones.
Right there. So this is a fresh track because it rained last night. We know a deer was in the area.
It's several hours old because you can see where the earth has been pushed up. It's lost. There's no moisture in it. The sand is just completely dried away.
But this track is fresher than this track.
Oh yeah, this track was, you can see it's been blurred by the rain. So this was made before last night, whereas this has been made since last night. But again, same here. But again, this isn't anything to get excited about because it tells you that the deer are here and they're coming in probably at night. But as far as getting too excited, you'd see tracks like this all over
the place.
if it was all
Well, tracks are the easiest deer sign to find, but deer leave tracks everywhere they walk, day and night. So tracks alone don't give you a big clue as to their behavior, and neither do another common sign, the droppings.
But there they are.
And like you said, they're reasonably fresh because you can see they're shiny, and that mucilaginous covering deteriorates very, very quickly. So when you find fresh droppings like that are still wet and shiny, particularly on a warm, windy day like that, you know they were made just a few hours ago.
It helps to know if tracks and droppings are fresh. Now that tells you that the deer have been active during daylight and these aren't just night areas. But Glen Dudderer and I wanted to find more definitive deer sign, more particularly buck sign, because that's what we're after. And we'll find it even though we're on a corner bordered by two county roads.
The road doesn't bother the deer?
No.
Okay, we got the swamp right over there.
That's my first hint, is I'm looking for a place that deer can go that I know hunters typically aren't going to follow, and I know that's a wet, swampy area, and hunters just don't bother it. So that's component one, a refuge.
The deer are obviously using that swamp now.
Oh yes, sure, it's a good, safe place to go. It's a place to be away from disturbance for whatever reason.
Okay, now up here on the high ground we have some looks like some balsam or some fir trees here. These berries aren't worth anything to deer.
Well, they'll nibble on them. I mean,
Nibble on the berries?
Sure, these are crab apples of different species, and they'll nibble on that, and if not, they'll certainly nibble on the branches of the apple. I mean, this is typical southern Michigan deer habitat, and it's great. The swamp, then a row of spruce, and then here's a row of apple trees loaded with apples, and then over there's a nice dense stand of young trees under that oak, so there's a place to feed and eat.
But this to me looks like a big attraction to the deer right here, the strip of Scotch pines.
Sure, yeah, covered bridge, a protected travelway. They can move a long distance through this kind of habitat and be relatively undisturbed.
Let's go up here. We can. Yeah, they like to bed down.
Yeah, this tall grass is excellent bedding, and depending on which way the wind's blowing, that pine is going to give them.
Okay, look at this trail here. Look at this trail here, OJ. This is. You can see where they've come from the pines, and you can see that very definitely. It's come right down through here, and it leads right through here. You can see in between the crab apples where the leaves are tromped down. When you stand back as you're walking, you can see this easily.
Yeah, that's what you want to look for is the pattern in relation to all the other things, and not start concentrating on hoof prints, but these general relationships.
Now,
patterns.
Buck rubs don't mean a heck of a lot to me because bucks are all over and they make rubs all over. but they're still fun to see.
Yeah, well, you said it best a few years ago. A buck rub means a buck rubbed his antlers there.
Right.
He ain't necessarily going to do it there again.
Now, you're not going to find buck rubs on the pine trees. We didn't see any on the crab apples there, but on these little aspens is where we'll look right up ahead here.
There's an excellent example. And some old ones and some fresh ones we can point out too. A nice new one, probably done in August. Here's one that's done fairly recently. The wood's just beginning to dry out. And then here's one, of course, that was done last year, maybe even the year before that.
The bigger the rub, the bigger the deer generally.
Well, I don't know any research to back that up, but
Come on, everybody knows that, Glenn.
that's a wide-held opinion, and I won't argue with it.
Okay, we'll find some other rubs. About all of these trees have been hit. Now, some of these are old, but look at this right here.
Yeah. And everybody say, hey, 3-inch tree that high, it's got to be a big deer. And I'd argue this in favor of that. If a deer's going to rub that high, it had to be a pretty big deer to start with.
Every tree that I see in here, every little sapling, even some of the big ones like this right here, have been rubbed.
And why they tend to prefer these stands, I don't know. But typically, you know, this is where you look. And we looked here, this is what we found. We were looking for it.
Okay, I'd say this thick stuff right here is a big attraction for the deer, this trail, because of this field.
Sure. Let's start looking for travel lanes through here, heavily used travel lanes. But this is a little secluded spot, so this is where I say, hey, there's probably scrapes in here. And that's what I tend to be more attracted to and say, this is where I'll probably hunt.
So the deer can walk along here and overlook. See, the wind is coming up right here from the lowland up the ridge here during the day. So they get a good scent of anything that's happening down there. A lot of use. Okay, right up here is a scrape.
It's in the kind of area that, you know, I look for these kinds of scrapes. There's some vegetation overhead. It's kind of secluded. And what would excite me, as you can see, this was done last night. The soil's still loosely piled. Here's a footprint. You can see where he had his hind feet and was pushing. You can see where he's clipped these branches off. And if I come back and check this again and find this same pattern, then you know it's a scrape. What you might do just to make sure that you've got an active scrape is take a twig, something you don't get the scent on it, and just throw some leaves or pine needles on it like that. And boy, if that's gone the next day or two, he's tending this scrape regularly. And so it's what I would call an active scrape. And I would want to be somewhere around here, but not right on it, a few yards off that way or that way. And this is probably the trail that he uses to come in here. Notice it's not heavily used. And what that suggests to me is this is one animal, probably a buck, coming in here, making this scrape, tending this area, you know, early in the morning, late in the evening.
Let's follow up here and see where he would maybe go. Now look, now here's an area where deer can go through. It's only this high and it has these prickly multiflora rows, but they duck right down and go scoot right underneath there. That buck likes the thick stuff. He isn't taking the easy way through.
And that's typically where you find them, in very thick cover, not too far from a primary scrape. And they usually get into that cover before it gets light and stay there until dark.
Where would you suppose he beds down?
Right there.
Right here?
Somewhere rattling through this thicket is one of his major bedding areas.
Bedding areas, scrapes, rubs, trails, tracks, droppings. They're all clues to the daily habits of white-tailed deer, and when you read the habitat, use natural camouflage for a blind and position yourself in a way that you're downwind from where you think the deer is likely to come, then you've got a good deer blind. Don't be afraid to move if conditions change, and you'll have the best chance of at least seeing deer, or maybe a buck, and that makes a day in the woods all worthwhile.